We're back with District Grants 102. I'm still Elise Buckite with the Mid-Missouri Solid Waste Management District. And if you haven't yet, please make sure that you've already looked through District Grants 101 before you move on to this video. So in this video, we are going to be doing a top level view of our application. We'll talk about the components in the application, some basic things that we see most often that people get confused about, and what the attachments and other documents look like. For a much more detailed look at the application, we'll need you to actually get into it and look at it and come to us with those very specific questions that you may have. But I think this video should answer most of the questions that we get asked. Let's take a look. So the application itself has 8 pages and really only 7 if your project is under $50,000. More of the work comes in later on with some of the attachments that we ask you to have, but the application itself is not extremely detailed. We really want you to be concise and to deliver the information necessary for our scorers to be able to evaluate whether it's a project that we will fund. You'll notice some asterisks here. That's because our preliminary application is just those first 3 items. So both your preliminary and your final application will have an applicant info page, a budget, and an executive summary. When you move on to the final application, you will also have an estimated diversion section, a project evaluation section. You will have goals and implementation plan on one page, key personnel and previous grant funding on another. And then we have one more page with a couple more questions for additional info for grants over 50,000. Let's take a little closer look. On the applicant information page, it's most of the things you would expect. We need to know who you are, how to contact you, who's going to be involved, where the project is happening, all of that kind of basic information about your organization. The first place that we see people have a little bit of confusion is project start and end date. Right now, you don't have to know exactly when you're going to sign that financial assistance agreement for your project to begin because we don't know that information. So it's best to just estimate right now when that project will start. So for our fiscal year 26 grants, we estimate small grants will start on January 15th, 2026, and for large grants, April 15th, 2026. The project end date is a little easier for you to know, and this is helpful for us to understand how long the project period will be for. So we typically suggest a minimum of 1 year and a maximum of 2 years to begin with. This date is not how long you're going to be doing the activities. We hope that you continue the activities begun or continued in the project for many years to come. This is really when what you will be talking about in your executive summary. So from purchasing the equipment, training the people, creating the materials, up until you have enough time to evaluate the impact of the project. So we find typically 1 to 2 years is a good time. For new applicants, I definitely encourage you to push towards that 2 year time frame because there are always things that come up, difficulties with purchasing and supply chain. So giving yourself enough room that you hopefully don't have to come and ask for an extension is a good idea. You can end early if your project is satisfied all of the goals that you have had. Maybe it's been 18 months and you've done everything you need to do. We can talk about ending early, and that works. The other thing on the applicant information page that can be kind of confusing is income. And this is really not applicable to most organizations. We have some organizations that are creating a good or a service, and they are selling that. So we like to have an estimate of what that income will be during the project period, because one of the requirements is that that profit during the project period time must go back into the project. So for most organizations, you can just skip that part. The other thing I wanted to make sure you know is down at the bottom, we talk about who is authorized to sign and who the project manager is. We use the authorized signatory information for if your application is accepted and we move forward with funding, that is who we will be sending the contract to for execution. So think about who in your organization has the fiscal authority to be able to sign the contract. And the program manager, it might be in your organization, the grant manager who's doing all of the coordination of the application. It could also just be the on-site manager for the project, whatever is the setup at your organization. All right, we'll spend a little bit of time here on the budget section. It is always a little different at different grant programs how the budget works and what is requested of you as an applicant. So this is an example, not a real project, but an example. I think in this project, they were getting a new box truck for a resale store. All right, so first under personnel, we have a box truck operator. Now, when you are going to have personnel on your budget, we need you to list them by their title, not by their name. So that's why this doesn't say Joe Smith, it says box truck operator. And then it lists how many dollars per hour and how many hours. So the box truck operator is making $25 an hour, and we have totaled it up, and for the routes that we have planned during the project period, they will be doing 100 hours of labor. So that equals $2,500. And for this applicant, they have that under match. So in order to later on show us that they paid that, they may give us pay stubs or a report from their payroll office that shows checks were sent with an indication of how many hours were devoted to the project. Under the next line for personnel, we have resale store volunteers. Now, this will be indicated in your guidance document. There is an online database that will tell you how much volunteer labor is valued at in Missouri for the year. And so at the time that we created this example, it was $28 an hour. And those resale store volunteers were expected to do 500 hours of volunteer service. And that equals $14,000. So that volunteer labor is also being used as match in this pretend application we have. Now we've got a few other items here, and these are where the grant fund requests come in. So a dock door installation for $12,000, a Ford E-Series box truck for $45,000, and marketing for a new program, $4,000. Our total requested grant funds is $61,000. And this will auto-calculate for you on the application. It gives you the minimum match amount. So our minimum match is 20%, and the match that this applicant has already committed to is well over the 20% requirement. Something important to keep in mind is that each of these expenses is going to need some justification. So later on, under the attachments section, you'll see that we're asking you to include justification for your costs. So for a dock door installation, you maybe have emailed with a couple providers in your area, a couple companies, and they have said, looking at your situation, I estimate that's about $11,000. Maybe one has come out and actually given you a full bid and it came in at $13,000. Or maybe you've done one of these in the past and you can say, here, last year we did a dock door installation at our other facility and it cost us $11,000. We expect costs to have gone up a little bit. So that helps our scorers and the state know that this cost is reasonable and within what the market is expecting. For equipment, the Ford E-Series box truck, you don't have to necessarily have a formal bid or anything for that, but maybe you have found on a website, maybe an auction site, similar vehicles that would fit this need, or maybe this exact box truck, or maybe one that's a year newer or a year older, and you can show that the $45,000 is within the expected costs. Marketing for the new program at $4,000, we would want to see a couple, maybe emails, maybe website screenshots that show that for the maybe the radio ads or the television ads or the creative work that you are hoping to get done, it would be about this cost. It's important to remember that the district does not allow indirect costs. So you do see that for the box truck operator, $25 an hour. That is their pay, and we are happy to fund that either as grant funds or as match. However, you're not going to list their insurance or their pension payments or any of that along here because it is just not an allowable expense in Reach and H. All right, diversion and evaluation. So it's very important with our projects that they are measurable in some kind of way. So you need to determine what your intended outcomes are and how you will measure to see if you've reached them. If materials are collected for diversion, say you're collecting aluminum cans or textiles, you need to be able to measure and record the weight of those materials. So we like to be able to report what our tonnage is of our program, how many tons of materials we have kept out of the landfill. And that starts with each of our grantees. Now, you can include in your project that you need a scale, or maybe there's some really cool equipment out there, pallet jacks that have scales on them, all kinds of ways to determine what your tonnage is. And then you need to make sure that you have a system in place to continue tracking that tonnage, those weights over the time of the project. If you're not doing diversion, there are other measurable outcomes you can track. So maybe it's how many participants come to your composting class. Maybe you do a survey about your composting class to see if people learned a lot of information. A lot of our education projects, they might do a pre-assessment and a post-assessment. So what did the students know about waste reduction before they came in, and what do they know after? And then you could report that there was an increase in knowledge for all of your participants. Whatever you are doing, there should be some way to track and make sure that the public funds that were invested into this project had a measurable outcome. Next, you have your goals and implementation plan. If you've been a past grantee with us, this page has kind of changed over time. And it's a little bit broader now, and you're able to kind of customize it a little bit more for what your unique needs are. So you can use this page to identify what actions are necessary to successfully implement and manage your projects. You do not have to list every single thing that you're going to do, but we've got it broken down by quarter here. So in the first quarter after your project begins, maybe you're going to be doing equipment bids and putting out a search for a marketing consultant, or maybe you're going to be looking to hire your driver for your program. So what are your quarter one activities? And you'll want to continue each time. And each quarter you'll need to report to us. So you can always put reporting to the district on there. Maybe you need to ask for reimbursement after you've made a big purchase. This helps you think through your project and identify how to make sure that you have the capacity and the plans in place. But most importantly, on the application side, you can use this page to show the scorers that you understand how to actually effectively implement your program. This is especially important for new grantees, new applicants who the board is unfamiliar with. They're going to have a lot of questions about whether your organization has the strength and the wherewithal, the resilience, the capacity to be able to actually pull this off. So you can use this page to demonstrate that you do know how to accomplish a project of this magnitude, and that you are more likely to be successful. We've got some examples on there of different actions that you may want to include. Key personnel. This is another section. It's very small, and I think people sometimes overlook it and think it's just a box to check off, but it gives you a really important part of the application for you to make another argument about why you deserve funding. So In this little section, you will put the key project personnel and a summary of their technical and managerial ability. So you definitely need to have your project manager on there. If it's like your grants manager, having them say that they have managed X dollars worth of grants or this many grants to successful completion, or they are well versed in grants at the state, local, and federal level. All of that demonstrates that you have some financial and managerial experience here. You also might want to list out more technical experience. So if you're doing an education program, does your personnel have experience in education? If you're doing an engineering, a recycling program, you want to see that there's someone involved who can actually handle that. So it's a small section, and you don't need to be extremely wordy, but you will want to put some of that important information to explain and justify that your organization and your people have the abilities. Previous grant funding. So we've narrowed this down to just in the last 10 years. Primarily, this is about grant funding that you've had with the Solid Waste Management District. If you don't have that list handy or you don't know exactly how much was awarded or expended, you can always reach out to our office and we keep this information, so we can help you fill it out. Now, if you have not been awarded a grant with the Solid Waste Management District in Region H, you could include some of the projects you've done with other districts or other notable grants. So if you have done community block grants or any number of the recent federal grants that have been around, you can still use this section to make an argument that you are able to manage grants and publicly funded grants of this size or this scale. So now we get to that extra page. This is for the grants that are requesting over $50,000. And we just have 2 extra questions here. So you need to summarize your business plan for the 2 years following the project end date. This lets us know that these higher dollar projects have a plan to continue to develop and to make sure that that money is continuing to do work in the community. Then you need to describe your sources of project funding with estimations of revenue and how revenue will be used. So if this is especially for a business that is asking for funding, they want to make sure that you have a pathway to sustainability. So it's less about making sure that money is going directly back into exactly what you were doing, and more about making sure that you have a plan to continue operating and continue providing this service or experience to the community. For nonprofits, that's also very important. Sustainability is really vital in our project. We want to make sure that in our grant program, we want to make sure that our projects don't just die off if funding gets tight one year or isn't available. We want to see projects that can sustain themselves. All right, so the attachments. I've only got one slide for this, but it's a very important slide. The first thing is the match commitment document. So in our grant program, your match amount that you have in your budget is a commitment. And whatever the project costs, unless there's an amendment at some point, you are committing to put in that amount of money, whether it is with volunteer hours, labor hours, in-kind activities, or just cash paying for other project components. That amount is a hard amount. So we ask for a match commitment document, which is notarized. This is also helpful because there can be a lot of turnover in nonprofits, especially, but in governments and in for-profits as well. And we want to make sure that your organization understands that level of commitment. So we do require this to be notarized. You can get that done at your library, your post office, and likely your bank as well. Quotes for equipment and services. So up to about $3,000, we ask for at least 2 quotes. And as I mentioned before, that can be something as simple as a screenshot from a website, going on Home Depot and saying this tiller is this amount of money, and we've justified why we need it, and here's how much why the cost is there. But for some of those larger services, it is going to be a good idea to reach out and make sure you know what that cost is going to be and that it's going to all fall within the scope of the funding request. So that can be an estimate, a formal estimate. It can be an informal bid. It can be proof of past work, that kind of thing. Letters, ordinances, etc., demonstrating partnerships or support. So, for instance, if you say that you're going to be doing this K-12 education program in schools throughout the district, we need to know that you've talked to some schools, or that there is a reasonable expectation that you will be able to have that partnership. So even if you haven't started doing that work yet, we would like to see a letter of partnership or a demonstration of that from the school district or from a teacher, or an after school program if that's the route you're going. And for other projects that are going on in the community, if you say this is a huge need and we're going to fill it, you want to make sure that you've been able to demonstrate that that need is really strong. So for some of our projects, they've said we want to expand our recycling program to the commercial sector. And then they were able to provide evidence from their local chamber of commerce that said, yeah, we really need this expansion, and the commercial businesses in our area are asking for this, and it's going to be really good. So it helps show that you're not just coming with an idea, but that you've actually done the work and talked to people, and there's evidence of that. Necessary permits, waivers, or licenses. So we do our best to identify what might be available, but it's important to think through your municipal, your county, your state, and your federal requirements. So you can't just start a large scale commercial composting operation. You need to have either a permit or a waiver for that activity. So we do our best to try and help you identify what you need, but it's always good to talk to your regional economic development office or MU extension program, and they can also help you identify what permits, waivers, or licenses you might need for your specific project. Now we've got a little space there because these last two attachments are only for projects over $50,000. So you have 2 years of financials or a government bond rating. And these financials, it could be from a public audit that has been done, or it could be just something from your accountant. It really depends on the entity what that's going to look like. A government bond rating is usually easier to receive from our municipal or county applicants because their financials are extensive. And then for construction projects, a preliminary design or an engineering drawing to demonstrate that you understand the scope and there's some basis for this plan. So that's all we've got in our application. It took a little bit longer than I expected to go over it, but I encourage people to get started on the application and start filling it out as soon as they're interested, because it helps you identify what questions you may have, and we can get those answered sooner in the process. Now you've already been through 101 and 102. As we move into District Grants 103, we're going to dig into the executive summary and what components are necessary for your application to shine. Thanks.